The Ice Age was not simply a chapter in human history. It was the ultimate test of survival. Imagine standing on a windswept plain where the earth is buried beneath thick snow and the air cuts like a knife. The horizon is a blur of white, broken only by the massive shadow of a mammoth trudging across the frozen ground. The temperature plummets far below freezing, and the sun, when it appears, offers no real warmth, only a dim glow that weakly filters through gray skies. For the cavemen of this era, winter was not a passing inconvenience, but a ruthless season that lasted for months, sometimes years, bringing death to the unprepared and resilience to the survivors. In this world, the cold was not just a physical force. It was an ever-present predator. It crept into bones, stiffened muscles, and drained energy from the body. To fight it meant constant vigilance, as fire, food, and shelter were never guaranteed. Unlike modern humans, who can simply close a door, light a heater, and wrap themselves in layered clothing, prehistoric people were naked before nature's fury. They relied on the strength of their community, the skill of their hunters, and the ingenuity of their tool-makers to withstand the merciless environment. The struggle between warmth and frost was a battle fought every single night. The landscape itself mirrored this conflict. Glaciers spread like vast walls of ice across much of the world, carving valleys and trapping rivers in their frozen grasp. The ground was often so hard that it resisted the sharpest stone tools, making digging or building a painful chore. The wind never seemed to rest. It screamed across the open plains, carrying snow that blinded and froze the skin on contact. Even inside caves, the dampness and chill could seep into flesh, reminding early humans that there was no true escape from the season. This was a world in which comfort was a rare and fragile state. Yet amid this bleakness, there was life. The mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, reindeer, and other animals roamed the icy terrain, their survival just as precarious as that of the humans who hunted them. For every creature, the cold dictated existence. Migration routes, feeding grounds, and breeding cycles were all driven by the relentless rhythm of the seasons. Humans watched these animals closely, for their movements meant either the promise of food or the certainty of hunger. To track them was to read the language of the earth, and to fail was to risk starvation in a land where no crops could grow. For cavemen, survival during the coldest nights was as much a mental struggle as a physical one. Fear was a constant companion. The silence of the frozen night could be suddenly shattered by the distant roar of a cave lion or the howl of wolves, both of which prowled the darkness in search of weakness. Inside the shelter of a cave, families huddled together, their breaths forming small clouds in the air, as if nature itself sought to remind them of how fragile and temporary life could be. Firelight flickered on the walls, casting dancing shadows that blurred the line between safety and threat. Every pop of burning was reassurance. Every gust of wind outside a warning that survival depended on vigilance. The contrast of this world defined the human experience. Warm versus frost, life versus death, hunger versus feast. Each day brought a test, each night a trial. The cavemen who endured were not merely existing. They were adapting, creating, and learning to bend nature just enough to survive. Their resilience in the face of such overwhelming odds would become the foundation for the human story. Without their endurance through winters that seemed endless, our species would never have reached a point where we could look back, study, and imagine what life in those frozen times was truly like. The cold grip of prehistory was merciless, but also forged a human spirit. Those who could not endure vanished, while those who survived carried forward new strengths, skills, and knowledge. And so, the Ice Age became not only an age of suffering, but also an age of transformation, where the first sparks of ingenuity began to shine against the darkness of endless winter. The Ice Age carved a world unlike anything we know today. Imagine entire continents covered in massive sheets of ice that towered hundreds of meters thick, stretching endlessly across the horizon. Rivers froze into solid pathways, mountains were crowned with glaciers, and valleys lay buried beneath snow that never melted. The air was thin and razor-sharp, and the land groaned under the weight of ice pressing down upon it. This was a frozen kingdom where nature itself seemed hostile, a place where the line between beauty and terror was thin, and where every living thing was forced to adapt or perish. For early humans, this world was more than a backdrop. It was a constant threat, The cold was not a season to be endured, but a permanent state of existence that could last for decades. Summers were brief and mild, offering only a short window of relief before the brutal freeze returned. Nights, in particular, were merciless. Temperatures plunged so low that even a few hours without shelter or fire could mean death. In such a world, the fear of the elements was as great as the fear of predators. Social organization and cooperation were equally vital. Families and tribes depended on collective action for survival, hunting in coordinated groups, sharing food equitably, and caring for the weakest members. Rituals, whether fireside prayers for shorter winters or offerings to animal spirits, reinforced bonds and created shared identity. Leadership emerged, often based on experience, wisdom, or courage, guiding communities through uncertainty. These early social structures became the blueprint for human society, emphasizing fairness, trust, and mutual dependence. In essence, the Ice Age was both a crucible of survival and a training ground for civilization. Psychological resilience was another crucial legacy. Cavemen faced fear daily: predators, starvation, frostbite, and the isolation of vast frozen landscapes. Yet through ritual, storytelling, and communal activities, they learned to manage stress, maintain hope, and turn anxiety into action. Fireside rituals and collective hunts were not mere cultural expressions. They were mechanisms for mental endurance. By mastering both the physical and psychological challenges of winter, humans developed traits of patience, courage, and foresight that would define the species for generations. The material culture of the Ice Age also left enduring marks. Tools, weapons, and clothing techniques evolved through experimentation and observation. Bone needles, flint-tipped spears, and woven furs were not only practical, but represented the beginnings of technology and craftsmanship. Art and cave paintings documented experiences, spiritual beliefs, and observations of the natural world, preserving knowledge for the future. These cultural artifacts are proof that even in the harshest conditions, humans were thinking, creating, and leaving legacies that would inform successors long after the Ice Age ended. Moreover, the relationship with nature shaped early environmental understanding. Following herds, observing predator behavior, and interpreting seasonal changes taught humans to read the land, anticipate challenges, and interact with ecosystems sustainably. Knowledge of animal migrations, plant cycles, and weather patterns became crucial survival skills and established an early framework for ecological intelligence. Humans learned to live in balance with their environment, understanding that survival depended not just on brute strength, but on observation, respect, and adaptation. Winter survival also instilled a profound sense of mortality and legacy. The fragility of life in harsh seasons made every success, every survival, and every story meaningful. Children were educated in skills, rituals, and traditions to ensure continuity. Elders imparted wisdom, ensuring that knowledge of fire, clothing, hunting, and shelter passed across generations. In this way, cavemen created not only life-sustaining strategies, but a cultural memory, a continuity that allowed humanity to endure long after individual lives ended. Ultimately, the Ice Age's winters were more than a test. They were a crucible that refined humanity. Cavemen emerged not merely as survivors, but as innovators, artists, strategists, and social architects. Every fire tended, every praise shared, and every ritual performed contributed to a growing legacy of human intelligence, cooperation, and culture. The lessons of cold, danger, and scarcity became the foundation for resilience, shaping the trajectory of human civilization in ways still felt today. The ice was relentless, and for cavemen, survival meant understanding its rhythms, even when those rhythms seemed incomprehensible. The terrain itself was a paradox. On one hand, it inspired awe. Shimmering ice cliffs, crystal caves, and vast snowfields glowed under moonlight in haunting silence. On the other hand, it presented endless obstacles. Frozen rivers became treacherous paths where a single misstep could send a person plunging beneath the ice. Blizzards could descend without warning, erasing landmarks and trapping family for days in the suffocating darkness of caves. Even the ground seemed unyielding, too frozen for digging, making the search for shelter or resources an exhausting battle. The very earth had turned against those who walked upon it. The cold dictated life for both humans and animals. Mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses migrated across icy plains in desperate search of grass hidden beneath the snow. Reindeer herds moved in vast numbers, pursued by packs of wolves that were as hungry as the humans who tracked them. For cavemen, these creatures were not only a source of food, but also teachers of survival. Watching their movements revealed where rivers thawed first, where valleys offered shelter from winds, and where the scarce vegetation managed to grow. To follow the animals was to follow life itself, and to lose their trail was to drift toward starvation. Yet survival in this icy wilderness was not only about hunting and gathering, it was about enduring fear. The silence of the frozen landscape could be as terrifying as the roars of predators. A sudden crack of shifting ice or the low rumble of an avalanche reminded humans that their world was unstable, always on the edge of collapse. The fear was not only of death but of isolation, of being cut off from one's group, left alone in a sea of snow and silence. In such moments, the Ice Age became less a physical landscape and more of a mental prison, testing not just bodies but spirits. Still, amid the terror, there was resilience. Cavemen learned to read the stars through clear winter skies to guide their movements. They carved paths through forests and marked safe routes along rivers. They built mental maps of this icy world, passed down through stories around the fire. What appeared to be a land of death to outsiders became a living memory of survival for those who endured it. The world of ice and fear forced adaptation, and in that adaptation lay the seeds of human progress. This was the paradox of the Ice Age. It threatened extinction, but it also demanded innovation. Without such brutal conditions, humans may never have developed the ingenuity that allowed them to conquer fire, fashion clothing, or craft tools capable of piercing the hides of giant beasts. Fear was constant, but fear also sharpened instincts and bound communities together. The frozen world was a harsh teacher, but it was also the forge in which humanity's resilience was shaped. The howling wind of the Ice Age was more than a nuisance. It was a force of destruction. It carried snow like daggers, cutting into exposed skin and robbing the body of warmth in minutes. Even the strongest hunters could not fight it for long. To stand unprotected on an open plain was to gamble with death. For cavemen, the battle against the wind was as crucial as the battle against hunger. Shelter was not a luxury. It was a thin line between survival and extinction. Without walls to break the storm or a roof to hold in heat, the fire they cherished would be blown out, and their bodies would freeze before dawn. The most reliable shelters were caves, carved into hillsides or mountains by time itself. These stone sanctuaries provided natural barriers against the elements, a ready-made fortress where families could huddle together. The cave mouth often faced away from prevailing winds, chosen with care by those who understood nature's patterns. Inside, walls absorbed and reflected firelight, giving both warmth and a sense of safety. Yet even caves had their dangers. The darkness was oppressive, filled with echoes and shadows that played tricks on the mind. Predators, bears, lions, or wolves might already claim these spaces, and claiming one meant a dangerous confrontation. But once secured, a cave was a treasure, a permanent reminder that nature could sometimes offer protection as well as peril. When caves were not available, humans turned to their own ingenuity. On frozen plains, some built shelters out of mammoth bones, stacking massive ribs and tusks into arches before covering them with hides and furs. These mammoth bone huts were both eerie and ingenious, testaments to resourcefulness in a world of scarcity. A structure like this could withstand biting winds and trap enough heat to make survival possible. To outsiders, they may have looked grim, like monuments of death, but to their builders, they were homes, a place where fire could flicker and children could sleep without fear of the storm. Simpler structures were also common. Lean-tos of wood and branches, covered with layers of animal skins, were quick to build and easy to repair. Snow itself became a building material, packed tightly. It created barriers that blocked the wind far better than open air. Some groups dug shallow pits in the ground and lined them with furs, then stretched hides over the top to make a roof. These semi-subterranean shelters trapped warmth and made use of the earth's insulation. Each design reflected the same truth. Human survival was not about brute strength but about adaptation, using whatever nature provided to carve out small islands of warmth in an ocean of cold. Shelters were more than walls and roofs. They were sanctuaries for the mind. The world outside was endless exposure. The scream of the wind, the crunch of snow underfoot, the terrifying silence of predators lurking just beyond the firelight. Inside a shelter, fear lessened. The flicker of flames on fur-lined walls, the sound of children breathing softly, and the warmth of bodies pressed together create a sense of safety that was as vital as physical protection. For early humans, the shelter was not just a shield against cold. It was a heart of community life. It was where stories were told, rituals were performed, and bonds of kinship were strengthened. The choice of shelter also reflected planning and foresight. Some groups built temporary camps during hunts, lightweight enough to abandon when following herds. Others sought out long-term dwellings where families could remain for an entire season. Archaeological evidence shows layers of soot and ash built up over years in certain caves, suggesting that people returned to the same shelters generation after generation. These sites became landmarks of survival, passed down like inheritances, where each new group added their own mark to the ancient stones. In this way, shelters became not just homes but symbols of continuity, reminders that humans had endured before and would endure again. The contrast between outside and inside defined the human experience. Step beyond the wall of hides or the cave's mouth, and the wind clawed its skin, whispering promises of death. Step back inside, and warmth wrapped around the body. Firelight soothed the mind, and fear retreated. This duality shaped the psychology of survival. Cavemen did not merely build shelters. They built worlds where life would be sustained against the crushing power of nature. Every stick placed, every hide stretched, and every stone stacked was an act of defiance against the ice age itself. Without these shelters, the story of humanity might have ended in the snow. It was not the strongest hunters or the fiercest warriors who guaranteed survival, but the builders, the planners, and the caretakers who transformed the wilderness into a place where human life could continue. Shelter turned fear into hope, chaos into order, and exposure into endurance. In the war against the wind, walls of bone, stone, and hide became humanity's most faithful allies. In the endless cold of the Ice Age, fire was more than a tool. It was a miracle, a living force that separated humans from the rest of the animal world. To sit by the flames on a night when the wind screamed across the plains was to know safety, warmth, and hope. Fire was a line between life and death, a fragile ally that had to be fed and protected with the same care given to a newborn child. For cavemen, fire was not simply survival. It was companionship, a symbol of control over a world that often felt uncontrollable. The earliest humans did not invent fire. They discovered it. Lightning strikes, volcanic eruptions, and smoldering forests first brought this fierce element into their lives. Imagine a group of people approaching the charred remains of a tree after a storm, embers glowing in the darkness. The first to dare reach and would carry a branch back to camp, shielding it with desperate care. That glowing ember was not just light, it was life itself. To lose it meant facing the dark without protection, a terrifying thought in a land where predators lurked unseen, and the cold could kill within hours. Eventually, humans learned not only to keep fire, but to create it. Sparks from striking flint against pyrite, embers coaxed into flame with dry grass, or friction from drilling would become gateways to mastery. The process was not easy. It required patience, skill, and constant practice. Every spark that leapt into smoke was a triumph. Every flame that grew into a blaze of victory against a merciless winter. To know how to make fire was to hold power, and those who mastered it became vital figures in their groups. Protectors not with weapons, but with knowledge. Once fire was secured, it transformed life. Flames offered warmth, pushing back the deadly chill of night and allowing humans to rest without shivering themselves to exhaustion. Firelight turned darkness into safety, keeping predators at bay with its strange glow. Many animals feared the flames, and cavemen quickly understood that fire was a barrier stronger than any wall of stone or bone. Around the fire, hunters could set down their weapons. Families could relax, and children could sleep. It was the one place where nature's dangers seemed to retreat. Fire also changed the way humans ate. Raw meat was difficult to chew, hard to digest, and sometimes dangerous. With fire, flesh softened, flavors deepened, and food became safer. Cooking unlocked more energy from each bite, strengthening bodies and fueling brains that demanded more nourishment. Social organization and cooperation were equally vital. Families and tribes depended on collective action for survival, hunting in coordinated groups, sharing food equitably, and caring for the weakest members. Rituals, whether fireside prayers for shorter winters or offerings to animal spirits, reinforced bonds and created shared identity. Leadership emerged, often based on experience, wisdom, or courage, guiding communities through uncertainty. These early social structures became the blueprint for human society, emphasizing fairness, trust, and mutual dependence. In essence, the Ice Age was both a crucible of survival and a training ground for civilization. Psychological resilience was another crucial legacy. Cavemen faced fear daily: predators, starvation, frostbite, and the isolation of vast frozen landscapes. Yet through rituals, storytelling, and communal activities, they learned to manage stress, maintain hope, and turn anxiety into action. Fireside rituals and collective hunts were not mere cultural expressions. They were mechanisms for mental endurance. By mastering both the physical and psychological challenges of winter, humans developed traits of patience, courage, and foresight that would define the species for generations. The material culture of the Ice Age also left enduring marks. Tools, weapons, and clothing techniques evolved through experimentation and observation. Bone needles, flint-tipped spears, and woven furs were not only practical, but represented the beginnings of technology and craftsmanship. Art and cave paintings documented experiences, spiritual beliefs, and observations of the natural world, preserving knowledge for the future. These cultural artifacts are proof that even in the harshest conditions, humans were thinking, creating, and leaving legacies that would inform successors long after the Ice Age ended. Moreover, the relationship with nature shaped early environmental understanding. Following herds, observing predator behavior, and interpreting seasonal changes taught humans to read the land, anticipate challenges, and interact with ecosystems sustainably. Knowledge of animal migrations, plant cycles, and weather patterns became crucial survival skills and established an early framework for ecological intelligence. Humans learned to live in balance with their environment, understanding that survival depended not just on brute strength, but on observation, respect, and adaptation. Winter survival also instilled a profound sense of mortality and legacy. The fragility of life in harsh seasons made every success, every survival, and every story meaningful. Children were educated in skills, rituals, and traditions to ensure continuity. Elders imparted wisdom, ensuring that knowledge of fire, clothing, hunting, and shelter passed across generations. In this way, cavemen created not only life-sustaining strategies, but a cultural memory, a continuity that allowed humanity to endure long after individual lives ended. Ultimately, the Ice Age's winters were more than a test. They were a crucible that refined humanity. Cavemen emerged not merely as survivors, but as innovators, artists, strategists, and social architects. Every fire tended, every praise shared, and every ritual performed contributed to a growing legacy of human intelligence, cooperation, and culture. The lessons of cold, danger, and scarcity became the foundation for resilience, shaping the trajectory of human civilization in ways still felt today. The warmth of a roasted meal contrasted sharply with the frozen landscape outside, a reminder that humanity had discovered something that no other creature could truly claim: mastery over transformation. Fire turned death into sustenance, cold into comfort, and danger into ritual. Beyond survival, fire became the center of community. It was never just a flame. It was a gathering place. Families and bands sat in circles, telling stories, singing, or sharing knowledge passed down from generation to generation. In the flickering light, shadows danced on cave walls, inspiring art and imagination. Fire was the backdrop to the first myths, the stage for the first storytellers. Children watched sparks fly upward and were told they were spirits rising to the sky. Hunters sharpened their spears in the glow, preparing for tomorrow's dangers. Fire was not only warmth, but also meaning. Protecting the fire was a sacred duty. Someone was always responsible for feeding it, even during sleep. A dying flame meant exposure, and so every spark was guarded as if it were a heartbeat. Ashes were carefully banked to preserve embers through night, ready to be coaxed into life again at dawn. When groups moved across the land, they often carried fire with them, glowing coals wrapped in bark or moss, transported like treasure. To walk into a new valley with a fire still alive was to carry civilization itself across the ice. Yet fire also demanded respect. It was both friend and danger. A flame too strong could consume shelters, burn clothing, and destroy resources in moments. Children learned early that fire was not to be played with. Its beauty concealed power that could turn against them. This duality, comfort and danger, made fire a symbol of a human condition. It mirrored life itself. Fragile, powerful, and always at risk of vanishing if not cared for. Over time, fire became woven into ritual. Flames were offered in ceremonies, sparks celebrated as signs from the spirit world. Cavemen saw in fire something beyond the physical, something sacred. The crackle of wood and the glow of embers suggested a living presence, a spirit that could protect or punish. To pray by firelight was to believe in its mysterious power, to see it as a bridge between the mortal and the divine. In this way, fire was not only survival but also belief, shaping the first steps toward religion and culture. The contrast fire created to define the Ice Age experience. Outside there was frost, silence, and death. Inside there was warmth, laughter, and life. Outside, the dark belonged to predators. Inside, the fire made humans the masters of their space. In the glow of flames, they were not prey but creators, no longer at the mercy of nature, but shaping it to their will. Fire was the eternal companion, the heartbeat of every camp, the light that carried humanity through the longest nights of winter. Hunting during the Ice Age was not just an act of survival. It was a daily gamble with life and death. The frozen plains offered little in the way of plants or fruit, especially in the heart of winter. To feed themselves, cavemen had to turn their eyes to the great animals that roamed the icy world: mammoths, bison, reindeer, and even dangerous predators when desperation grew too strong. Each hunt carried the promise of food and warmth, but also the risk of injury or death. A single misstep could mean not just the loss of a hunter, but the starvation of an entire family. Hunting was not done blindly. Cavemen were observers of nature, learning the rhythms of the herds and the habits of their prey. They studied tracks in the snow, the broken branches left behind by passing animals, and the distant calls that echoed through frozen valleys. Patience was their first weapon. To hunt meant to wait, to stalk silently, to move with the land rather than against it. Unlike predators that relied on speed and claws, humans relied on strategy, communication, and endurance. They could not outrun a mammoth, but they could outthink it. Weapons were simple but effective. Spears tipped with sharpened stone, sometimes hardened by fire, were thrust or thrown with deadly intent. Some groups crafted throwing sticks or primitive atlatls, allowing spears to fly farther and with more force. Traps and pitfalls were used when possible. Deep pits camouflaged with branches and snow could turn the weight of a beast against itself. Though crude by modern standards, these tools gave cavemen a crucial edge, transforming fragile human bodies into hunters capable of bringing down giants. But hunting was never the work of a single person. It was a communal act, requiring cooperation and trust. Men, women, and even older children took part in different roles. Scouts tracking herds, runners driving animals toward ambushes, and others waiting with weapons poised. A successful hunt was a symphony of effort, each person playing a part. Failure meant not only hunger but the erosion of hope, while success brought celebration, feasting, and a renewed sense of unity. The danger was immense. To face a mammoth or bison at close range was to stare at a wall of muscle and bone that could crush a human in seconds. Hunters risked being gored by tusks, trampled under hooves, or mauled by cornered prey. Even smaller animals like boars or deer could injure with sudden kicks or charges. Injuries were not minor inconveniences. In a world without medicine, even a broken limb or deep cut could end a life. The courage required to step into the path of such danger speaks volumes about the desperation and determination of early humans. When a hunt succeeded, the rewards were immense. A single mammoth could feed a group for weeks, providing not only meat but also hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, and fat for fuel. Nothing went to waste. Every part of the animal was used. A successful hunt transformed fear into relief, cold into warmth, and scarcity into abundance. Around the fire, the hunters would recount the chase, children would be fed until they slept, and families would feel, if only briefly, that they had triumphed over the merciless cold. Yet the shadow of hunger never disappeared. Winters were long, and food spoiled quickly without careful storage. Cavemen had to ration, drying strips of meat over smoke, burying them in frozen ground, or packing them in snow to last through the hardest months. They knew that one successful hunt did not guarantee survival. The next might end in failure, and the belly that was full today might be empty tomorrow. This constant uncertainty pushed them to hunt again and again, even when exhaustion weighed on their bodies and fear pressed on their minds. The contrast of hunting defined the Ice Age experience. It was both glory and terror, hope and despair. A feast one night could turn into starvation within weeks. Hunters returned with triumph in their eyes, or not all, their absence a silent reminder of the cost of survival. In this way, hunting became more than a means of obtaining food. It became a test of courage, intelligence, and cooperation. It was a ritual of life itself, the heartbeat of existence in a frozen world. For the caveman, to hunt was to live. Each spear thrust and every chase across the snow carried the weight of generations. The lessons learned on the hunt were passed down in stories, shaping the instincts of future hunters. In a world where nature held all the power, hunting was humanity's defiance, a statement that they, too, were predators, capable of standing against beasts and surviving the coldest nights of the Ice Age. For cavemen, a successful hunt was only half the battle. The real challenge began after the kill, keeping the precious meat edible for weeks or even months in a world where food was scarce and the cold relentless. Unlike today, where storage is effortless, Ice Age people had to invent ways to preserve food without tools of metal, salt in abundance, or permanent settlements. The survival of the entire group depended on this knowledge. A great feast one night meant nothing if the rest spoiled, wasted, or attracted predators. To endure the endless winter, cavemen became masters of preservation, turning fleeting victories into long-term survival. The cold itself was both an enemy and an ally. Freezing winds and ice could ruin exposed food, leaving it tough, tasteless, or scattered by scavengers. But with care, the same environment became a natural freezer. Cavemen buried meat deep beneath snowbanks or packed into crevices where the sun never reached. In these makeshift ice vaults, flesh remained intact, protected from decay. The frozen ground became humanity's first refrigerator, a reminder that even in hostility, nature could sometimes be used to serve survival. Smoke was another weapon in the struggle. By hanging strips of meat above slow fires, cavemen dried them until they hardened into tough but long-lasting rations. Smoke not only removed moisture, preventing rot, but also infused the food with compounds that deterred insects and scavengers. Though the taste was harsh and the texture difficult to chew, smoked meat could last far longer than fresh cuts. Around these fires, preservation itself became a ritual, a watchful process where patience meant the difference between famine and endurance. Drying and curing with natural salts found in some soils also played a role, though limited. In regions where mineral-rich earths or salty deposits existed, cavemen may have rubbed them into hides or flesh to extend their shelf life. These methods were experimental, discovered by observation, perhaps by seeing what nature did to carcasses left untouched in salt flats or frozen caves. Every discovery became knowledge. Knowledge became tradition, and tradition became the lifeline passed from one generation to the next. Food preservation was not only about meat. Fat, one of the most vital resources for surviving extreme cold, was carefully stored. Rendered down over flames, animal fat could be kept in containers made of bone or skin, used later for both food and fuel. In a world where every calorie mattered, fat was as precious as fire itself. It fueled bodies to the long hunts and gave warmth to the weak. Preserving it was an act of foresight, one that could mean survival when the next hunt failed. But preservation was not simply technical. It was social. Food was rarely hoarded by one. It was shared, distributed carefully across families within a group. The process of rationing was as critical as the hunt itself. Too much consumed at once, and famine would strike later. Too little shared, and bonds within the tribe would fracture. Around stored piles of smoked meat or frozen carcasses, decisions were made that reflected not just hunger but trust, leadership, and unity. Preservation was a collective promise that tomorrow's fire would still find something to cook. There was always fear tied to these stores. Hidden caches might attract wolves, scavenging hyenas, or rival humans who were equally desperate. Families guarded their supplies as fiercely as they guarded their children, aware that one theft could doom them. The contrast between abundance and loss was stark. The pride of a full store one day, the despair of discovering it plundered the next. In this way, preservation carried its own risks, a reminder that survival was never fully secure. Still, when done successfully, preserved food gave cavemen something rare: time. Time to rest, to care for children, to heal from wounds, and to dream beyond the next desperate hunt. Preservation turned survival from a frantic scramble into a measured strategy. It gave stability to a life defined by uncertainty, allowing humans to endure winters that would have otherwise consumed them. The act of saving food from the jaws of rot was more than survival. It was foresight, intelligence, and a declaration of defiance against the cold. Cavemen did not simply take from the land. They learned to stretch its gifts, to plan for days when nature offered nothing. In every strip of dried meat, every frozen cache beneath the snow, lay the proof that humans were learning to master time itself. Preservation transformed fleeting victories into lasting endurance, carrying humanity across the longest, darkest nights of the Ice Age. The frozen wilderness of the Ice Age was never silent, though it often appeared so. Beneath the howling winds and endless snow, predators moved with patience and precision, stalking the same prey that humans desperately depended on. To survive the winter was not only to endure hunger and cold, but to live alongside powerful hunters whose teeth and claws told a constant story of death. Wolves, bears, and great cats were not distant threats. They were immediate rivals, competitors for meat, and sometimes hunters of humans themselves. In every shadow, in every rustle of snow, danger breathed. Wolves were among the most relentless adversaries, and, eventually, unexpected allies. Packs shadowed the trails of mammoth herds and reindeer, waiting for weakness, much as human hunters did. Their coordination was uncanny. Silent gestures, sudden sprints, and calculated traps. For early humans, the similarity to their own hunting styles was both terrifying and enlightening. A pack of wolves could strip a carcass bare before humans even approached it, leaving nothing but bones. Yet sometimes, men and wolves crossed paths, not as enemies, but as tentative partners. Evidence suggests that during these icy millennia, wolves drew near human fires, scavenging scraps, and in return warning of dangers in the night. From this fragile exchange, the first whispers of domestication began, a fragile alliance forged in cold hunger. Bears embodied another kind of danger. Towering cave bears and brown bears sought shelter in dens during the harshest winters, but when roused, they were unstoppable. For cavemen, stumbling upon a bear's den was a moment of mortal peril. No spear could easily pierce its thick hide. No single human could face its strength. Yet, when desperation demanded, humans sometimes hunted them. A successful bear killed men enormous stores of meat and fat, enough to feed a group for weeks. But the risk was immense. One mistake, and hunters were crushed, torn, or left bleeding in the snow. Bears stood as symbols of both fear and provision, embodying the Ice Age's cruel paradox. Survival demanded confronting the very beast that could end human life in an instant. Then there were the cats, the great predators of stealth and silence. Saber-toothed cats, cave lions, and leopards haunted the forests and plains, moving like shadows across the white landscapes. Unlike wolves, they hunted alone or in small groups, striking with ambush rather than endurance. A human wandering too far from the fire, a child playing near the edge of the camp. Such vulnerabilities were opportunities for these cats. Their roars shattered the night, a sound etched into the memory of every generation that lived under their gaze. Yet, their kills also provided scavenging chances for humans. When a lion brought down a bison or deer, bold groups of cavemen sometimes drove it off with fire in numbers, claiming what they could from its conquest. The predator's victory became a human feast, but at the constant risk of retaliation. These animals were not just enemies, they were teachers. Watching wolves, humans learned the power of cooperation in the hunt. Watching cats, they understood the art of patience and silence. From bears, they grasped the need for strength and endurance. Every rival was also a mirror, reflecting strategies that humans adapted into their own survival. The Ice Age was a brutal classroom, where nature's fiercest killers were also its most brilliant instructors. The relationship with predators also shaped human fears, myths, and rituals. Around the fire, elders told stories of wolves with glowing eyes, of bears that walked like men, of lions whose roars summoned spirits. These tales were not just imagination. They were warnings, carved into memories so no child would wander carelessly into the snow. Over time, such creatures became symbols in cave paintings, etched onto stone walls with ochre and charcoal. Some images show hunts, others show animals standing larger than life, perhaps as gods or spirits to be respected and feared. For the cavemen, predators were not just animals. They were forces of the world, guardians of the balance between life and death. Encounters with these beasts often defined entire seasons. A hunt ruined by wolves could doom a tribe. A bear driven from its den could provide a lifeline. A cat stealing prey could force a migration. Every decision to fight, flee, or follow was a gamble with consequences that echoed for weeks. In this struggle, humans were not yet masters of the earth. They were one competitor among many, fighting tooth and nail for the same scraps of survival. And yet, despite the danger, there was an undeniable connection. Humans lived among predators, not apart from them. They shared trails, prey, and even instincts. Each fire built, each spear sharpened, each shelter fortified was a direct answer to the presence of these hunters. Without them, perhaps humans would not have learned so quickly, grown so cunningly, or bound together so tightly. Predators pressed humanity against the wall of extinction, and in resisting them, humans became stronger. In the end, wolves, bears, and cats were not just silent hunters of the Ice Age. They were shapers of human destiny. They taught fear, courage, and cooperation. They forced invention, ritual, and resilience. To live with them was to walk a razor's edge, where every night could bring death, and every dawn brought another chance to defy it. The story of cavemen in winter cannot be told without these predators, for they were as much a part of human survival as fire, stone, and bone. In the heart of the Ice Age, fire was more than a tool. It was a lifeline, a symbol, and a shield. Against a vast wilderness where snow never seemed to end and predators prowled just beyond the glow, fire gave humanity its first real advantage over the darkness. It brought warmth to frozen bodies, light to endless nights, and courage to hearts that trembled in fear. Where flames danced, life clung stubbornly to existence. Where fire died, despair crept in like the cold. For cavemen, mastering fire was not just survival. It was the first step toward taming the untamable world. The making of fire was itself a triumph. Unlike lightning strikes or wildfires sparked by dry grass, cavemen could not simply wait for nature's gift. They learned to create flame from friction and spark. Flint stones struck together sent showers of light, which, when caught in dry moss or bark, blossomed into smoke and ember. Wooden drills spun against one another, warmed by callous hands, created the spark of life through persistence. Each fire born this way was not taken for granted. It was revered. The process demanded patience and skill, and every flame felt like a victory over death itself. Once created, fire had to be guarded. In the brutal cold, flames could be snuffed by wind or drowned by snow in an instant. To let the fire die was to invite ruin. Families tended their fires like children, feeding them with sticks, branches, and sometimes dry dung when no other fuel could be found. Embers were carefully carried from camp to camp, glowing treasures hidden in bundles of bark or clay, ensuring the tribe never again had to endure the long, hopeless wait of fireless nights. To lose fire was to be reduced to helpless prey, naked against the elements and beasts alike. But fire was more than warmth. It was a weapon. When predators approached the edges of camp, glowing eyes in the night, cavemen waved torches, shouted, and held the line. Wolves recoiled, lions slunk back into the darkness. Even bears hesitated before the mysterious, searing heat. Fire created boundaries where none existed, invisible walls that held the wilderness at bay. With fire in their hands, humans no longer cowered in shadows. They stood upright, defenders of their fragile circle of light. Cooking was another revelation. Fire transformed raw flesh into nourishment more easily digested, unlocking calories vital for survival. Fat melted and was absorbed, bone marrow softened and could be extracted, and dangerous bacteria were destroyed by heat. Around the fire, meat was shared, stories were told, and bonds were strengthened. The fire pit was not only the first kitchen, but also the first stage, the center of community and memory. It gave more than food. It gave meaning, creating traditions of gathering that stretched across thousands of years. Psychologically, fire was a balm against despair. In endless darkness, where cold and silence pressed in like enemies, flames gave comfort. The crackle of burning wood, the glow on cave walls, and the shadows that danced in rhythmic patterns all create a sense of safety, even wonder. For children, fire was reassurance. For adults, it was a reminder of control. Rituals formed around it, with songs, chants, and offerings given to the flames as if they were alive, as if fire itself were a spirit. To sit by fire was to feel, if only for a moment, that humanity was not completely powerless. The mastery of fire also changed migration and settlement. With fire, humans could push into colder regions, expanding their reach into lands where survival would otherwise have been impossible. It lit caves, turning dark hollows into homes. It hardened wooden spear tips, making weapons deadlier. It lit the way through forests, guided travelers through storms, and offered hope when all else seemed lost. Fire extended the range of human life far beyond what nature had intended, reshaping the boundaries of survival itself. Yet fire carried danger too. Flames could turn wild, consuming shelters, furs, or stores of food in moments of carelessness. A stray spark might ignite dry grass, bringing destruction rather than safety. To control fire required respect and discipline. It demanded balance. Too much and it devoured, too little and it vanished. Cavemen learned this balance instinctively, a dance between reverence and caution, always aware that fire was both friend and threat. Over time, fire became something greater than survival. It became identity. To carry fire was to be human. It separated mankind from the beasts that shared their world. No wolf could summon flame. No bear could cook its kill. No lion could dance in the firelight. Fire made humanity unique, giving them not only power but also imagination. In its glow, shadows became art on cave walls, and sparks rose into the night sky like stars. Fire became a metaphor for life itself, fragile, flickering, yet unstoppable when nurtured with care. For cavemen in winter, fire was not optional. It was destiny. It was a weapon that turned prey into predator, the hearth that turned a family into a tribe, the torch that turned night into day. It was an invisible companion that whispered of possibility, urging mankind to push forward against the cold. Every flame lit in those frozen centuries was a promise that humans would not yield, that even in the darkest nights of the Ice Age, a small spark could carry the hope of survival. In the vast, merciless winters of the Ice Age, shelter was as vital as fire. Without protection from freezing winds and relentless snow, no amount of food or warmth could save a family. The cold crept into bones, stiffened muscles, and drained the will to move. Cavemen understood that survival demanded more than firelight alone. It required walls, roofs, and barriers to hold back the icy breath of nature. Shelter was humanity's shield, a fragile but essential fortress against extinction. The first and most obvious shelters were caves. Natural hollows and mountainsides offered immediate refuge, ready-made havens from wind and predators. Within their stone arms, families could gather, fires could burn, and stories could echo. But caves were not always kind. Some were damp, dripping with water that froze to ice. Others were already claimed by bears or lions, making them battlegrounds for ownership. The dark recesses bred fear as much as safety, and every shadow felt alive with hidden threats. Still, for many generations, caves were humanity's first homes, sanctuaries carved by the earth itself. Yet humans were not content to rely solely on what nature provided. Where caves did not exist, they created their own shelters. Using mammoth bones, reindeer antlers, and sturdy wooden poles, they built frames strong enough to resist heavy snow. These frames were covered with hide sewn tightly together, layered to trap precious heat. Some shelters were small, meant for a single family, while others formed clusters, like early villages where survival was strengthened by unity. Each construction was a triumph of ingenuity, a declaration that even in a frozen world, humans would carve space for themselves. Snow itself became an unlikely ally. Packed and shaped, It created windbreaks and domes that insulated against the bitter cold. These primitive snow shelters, much like later igloos, harnessed the very substance of winter to defy it. Inside, the temperature could rise dramatically compared to the outside air, proving that even in apparent hostility, the environment carried tools for survival. To lie within walls of snow, warmed by breath and fire, was to experience the strange paradox of safety built from the very force threatening life. The layout of shelters revealed much about human priorities. Entrances were often narrow, designed to keep heat in and predators out. Fire pits were central, radiating warmth to every corner. Sleeping spaces were lined with furs and grasses, lifting bodies from the frozen ground. Storage areas were carved into walls or marked by stones, keeping dried meat bones and tools safe for future use. These spaces were not random but carefully organized, showing an early understanding of design and efficiency. Even in the harshest conditions, cavemen sought not only survival but comfort, however humble. Shelters also became centers of social life. Within their walls, the family bond deepened. Children played in the glow of firelight, learning the skills of their elders. Hunters returned with meat, their victories shared in warmth. Stories, songs, and rituals filled the air, transforming shelters into more than physical defenses. They became places of identity, memory, and culture. In the endless white silence outside, humans found belonging inside. The hut or cave was not just protection from cold. It was the beating heart of the tribe. Building these shelters required immense effort. Skins had to be scraped, bones hauled, wood gathered. Tasks made more difficult by frostbitten fingers and dwindling energy. It was dangerous work, too. A sudden storm could collapse a half-built frame, burying supplies under snow. A poorly made roof could leak, turning safety into misery. But through trial and error, skills were honed. Knowledge was passed down. Where to place supports, how to tie sinew cords, which hides the layer thickest. Shelter building became not only survival but tradition, a craft taught from generation to generation. Shelters carried symbolic weight as well. To drive predators from a cave and claim it was an act of conquest, transforming a lair of beasts into a home of men. To raise huts from bones was to say, even in the land of giants, humans had a place. Every structure built was a marker of human resilience, standing in defiance of the storm. They were not grand or permanent, yet they carried immense meaning, proving that fragile beings could shape their environment rather than bow before it. Still, danger lingered. Fire sometimes filled caves with smoke, suffocating those within. Snowdrifts could bury entrances, trapping families inside. Rival groups might attack, seeking to steal the shelter rather than build their own. Every home was temporary, a fragile bubble of warmth in a world eager to consume it. The contrast was constant. Safety inside, peril outside. Life and death were separated only by the thin walls of hide, wood, and stone. And yet, within these shelters, something extraordinary happened. Humanity began to dream. Paintings appeared on cave walls, depicting hunts, animals, and mysterious figures. These were not mere decorations, but acts of expression, moments of imagination sparked by the security that shelter provided. For the first time, people were not only surviving winter, they were living it with meaning. The hut, the cave, the snow dome, each became the cradle of human creativity, where survival gave way to culture. For cavemen, building winter shelters was an endless battle against nature's cruelty, but it was also a testament to their adaptability, ingenuity, and will to endure. In every cave claimed, every bone hut raised, every snow wall built, humanity carved out a place of warmth in a frozen wilderness. The shelter was not just a structure. It was proof that even in the harshest winter, humans refused to surrender. In the unforgiving winters of the Ice Age, bare skin was a death sentence. Unlike the thick coats of wolves, the layered fat of bears, or the dense pelts of mammoths, humans were fragile and exposed. Fire and shelter gave protection, but without clothing, even the strongest hunter would not survive long in the biting winds and endless snow. Dressing for survival was not a matter of comfort. It was a daily struggle between life and frost, a constant reminder that the human body was never designed to withstand such cold unaided. The earliest clothing was simple. Hides draped over shoulders, fur wrapped around limbs, skins tied with sinew cords. Crude as they were, these garments trapped heat, kept moisture out, and allowed hunters to move in pursuit of prey. Over time, skill transformed necessity into craft. Scrapers made of stone were used to clean hides of fat and flesh, softening them for wear. Needles carved from bone pierced skins with surprising precision, while sinew served as thread. Stitch by stitch, cavemen learned to shape clothing into fitted forms, wrapping their bodies in the warmth of the very animals they hunted. Each garment was more than protection. It was a story of survival. A wolf's pelt became a cloak, its strength lending courage to the one who wore it. The fur of a reindeer lined boots, keeping feet warm on frozen ground. Mammoth hides, heavy and tough, were turned into cloaks or bedding, their weight a shield against icy gusts. Nothing was wasted. Bones became needles, tendons became cords, and even scraps of hide were layered together for extra insulation. Clothing was a second skin, carefully crafted to turn human weakness into resilience. Season dictated design. In deep winter, heavy furs covered nearly every inch of skin, leaving only eyes exposed. Hunters bound their feet in layers of hide, stuffed with dry grasses for insulation, creating the earliest forms of boots. Hands were wrapped in fur mittens, crude but effective against frostbite. In milder seasons, lighter hides were used, allowing movement without overheating. This constant adaptation showed a keen understanding of the balance between warmth, flexibility, and endurance. Cavemen did not merely wear clothes. They engineered them to match the shifting moods of the Ice Age. Decoration, too, began to creep into the survival art. Beads carved from bone or ivory, feathers from birds, and dyed ochre patterns adorned garments. At first glance, these seemed unnecessary in a world where every task was about survival. Yet, decoration carried meaning. Perhaps it signaled status, the hunter who killed a mammoth wearing part of its hide as a mark of honor. Perhaps it carried spiritual weight, charms to protect against misfortune or to honor the spirit of the animal. Clothing was not only practical, it was symbolic, a blend of survival and identity. For children and the weak, clothing was especially vital. Elders wrapped infants in furs, tucking them close to fire-warm bodies. Without this care, young lives would vanish in the cold. The act of clothing one another was itself a ritual of community, a reminder that survival was not solitary. Women, often skilled in sewing and hide preparation, became the weavers of life, ensuring that every member of the group was shielded against the frost. In this way, clothing was both labor and love, a quiet form of protection passed hand to hand. But even with fur and hide, danger remained. Snow soaked garments, freezing them stiff. Movement tore seams, leaving gaps where wind cut deep. A careless hunter might fall into icy water, his clothing becoming a trap that dragged him into death's grip. Maintaining clothing became as important as making it. Fires were used to dry soaked hides, oils rubbed into them to preserve softness. Repairs were constant, bone needles darting in and out of seams by firelight, mending what the day had broken. Clothing was never finished. It was always in the process of being made and remade. There was fear, too, tied to clothing. To be stripped of hides in winter was to face certain death. Raiders or rival groups sometimes targeted garments as much as food. For to steal furs was to steal survival. A cloak taken, a boot lost, a mitten burned. These small losses could decide life or death. Clothing was wealth, armor, and dignity all at once, the fragile barrier between humanity and the merciless cold. Yet in this fragility lay extraordinary innovation. Clothing allowed humans to go where no other naked primate could have ventured. It opened frozen plains, icy forests, and snowbound mountains to exploration. It enabled hunts in conditions that would have otherwise been impossible. It carried mankind across the Ice Age, garment by garment, stitch by stitch. In every scrap of hide worn on those ancient bodies, there was proof of ingenuity, proof it was stronger than winter itself. For cavemen, clothing was not fashion, it was defiance. Wrapped in the pelts of animals, they walked upright into the storm, carrying the warmth of life upon their backs. In every fur-lined boot and hide-sewn cloak was a message that humans, though fragile, would not yield. Clothing was the armor of survival, the invention that let humanity endure the coldest chapters of the Earth story. Without it, Fire and shelter would not have been enough. With it, mankind stood a chance against the endless winter. Hunting in the snow was both a necessity and a gamble. For cavemen, the winter landscape was not a quiet wonderland, but a battlefield where each step into the white expanse carried risk. The cold drained strength, prey grew scarce, and predators lurked unseen. Yet without the hunt, fires would burn without food to cook, children would starve, and families would wither in silence. Every hunt in winter was an act of defiance against nature itself, a declaration that humans would not bow to the ice. Snow changed everything. Tracks that might have been invisible in summer became clear markers of animal paths. Hunters could follow hoofprints of reindeer, mammoths, or bison across frozen plains, reading the story of movement written into the snow. But these tracks also betrayed the hunters themselves, leaving trails that predators or rival humans could follow back to camp. Snow was both guide and betrayer, offering knowledge at a cost. Weapons in winter had to be precise. Spears tipped with sharpened stone or hardened fire were the main tools, often launched with the aid of spear throwers for greater distance and power. Clubs, axes, and stone blades provided close combat, though such encounters were dangerous when facing beasts much larger than men. Hunters worked together, forming lines, circling prey, and driving animals into traps. A mammoth might be herded toward a pit concealed beneath snow and branches, its massive weight turning the ground itself into a weapon. Coordination was everything. A mistake could mean trampling hooves, shattered bones, or death in the snow. Winter prey was difficult to bring down. Reindeer and elk migrated in herds, their numbers and speed overwhelming. Mammoths, armored in fur and bulk, could crush hunters underfoot. Bison stood together, horns lowered in defense, forming living walls against attack. Even smaller animals, hares, foxes, and birds, proved elusive, darting across snow where human feet sank deep. The hunger of winter made every creature precious, but each demanded cunning and patience to catch. Ambush was often the key. Hunters learned to use the white landscape as camouflage, covering themselves in furs and snow to blend with the terrain. Silent approaches through forests, crouching low against drifts, waiting for hours in stillness. Such patience tested endurance as much as skill. When the moment came, the attack had to be swift and coordinated. One strike, one throw, one chance to bring the prey down before it fled into the endless expanse. Failure meant not only wasted energy but also lost hope, as the tribe returned empty-handed to waiting fires. The dangers were not limited to the prey. Predators, too, stalked the snowy plains, often drawn to the same herds humans hunted. Wolves followed at a distance, waiting to snatch a kill. Lions and saber-toothed cats prowled the edges of hunts, sometimes charging at hunters themselves. Even after a successful kill, danger remained. The smell of blood carried for miles across the frozen air, summoning rivals who would fight for the prize. A hunt did not end when the animal fell. It ended when the meat was safely carried back to camp. Injuries were constant companions. A slip on ice, a spear glancing instead of striking true, a horn goring flesh. Such accidents could cripple a hunter. In the cold, wounds froze and stiffened. Infection spread quickly and strength waned. To be injured on a winter hunt was often to be marked for death, unless companions carried the burden. Here, the tribe's unity was tested. To abandon the weak meant survival for the strong. To carry them meant slower progress and greater risk. These choices carved the harsh ethics of survival into the hearts of early humans. Yet there was triumph, too. The moment when a mammoth collapsed in the snow, when a reindeer was brought down by spears, when meat was hauled back to camp. It was victory against impossible odds. Firelight shone brighter on those nights. Bellies were full and spirits rose. Children laughed, elders told stories, and the tribe lived to see another dawn. Hunting was not only about feeding the body, it fed the spirit, proving that humanity could outwit beasts and endure the cold. The memory of hunts lingered in art and ritual. Cave walls bore images of charging bison, spears flying, hunters standing tall. Songs and chants told of bravery, caution, and sacrifice. Rituals were performed before hunts, invoking spirits for guidance and luck, while after successful kills, offerings were made to the animals themselves, honoring the life taken. Hunting in the snow was not merely survival. It was identity, woven into the very fabric of human culture. For cavemen, every hunt in winter was a story of contrasts: hunger and plenty, fear and courage, death and survival. To step into the snow with spear in hand was to walk the edge of existence, where failure could mean extinction and success meant life for the tribe. Hunting in the snow was not just a task. It was a crucible in which human resilience, cooperation, and ingenuity were forged. When the hunters returned from the frozen plains, dragging behind them the heavy weight of a kill, the moment marked far more than the end of the hunt. It was a turning point between despair and survival. The meat, fat, and bones they carried were more valuable than treasure, more sacred than gold. In the heart of winter, food was not simply nourishment. It was a heartbeat of the tribe, the bond that held families together, the difference between life and death. Sharing that food was a ritual as vital as the hunt itself. The act of dividing the kill was never random. It was governed by unwritten rules, a delicate balance between need, fairness, and tradition. Elders and leaders often oversaw the process, ensuring that each portion carried meaning. Hunters who risked their lives were honored, yet no one was left to starve. The children, the elderly, the sick, those unable to hunt, still received their share, for their survival represented the survival of memory, wisdom, and future generations. In this way, the distribution of food was not only practical but deeply symbolic, reinforcing the tribe's unity. Around the fire, the atmosphere transformed. Flames crackled, shadows danced, and the air filled with the rich scent of roasting meat. Hunger sharpened anticipation, but there was also ceremony in the waiting. Stories were told while the food cooked, tales of the hunt, of spirits thanked, of ancestors who had faced similar winters. The kill was not simply eaten. It was woven into the tribe's narrative, giving meaning to suffering and victory alike. Every part of the animal had purpose. Meat was roasted or smoked for immediate use, while strips were dried to last longer through the endless cold. Fat, dense with calories, was cherished as energy for the hardest days. Bones were cracked open for marrow, a rich and sustaining resource. Hides became clothing and bedding, sinews became cord, and horns or antlers were crafted into tools. Nothing was wasted. To waste was to dishonor both the hunters and the animal spirit, and to endanger the group's fragile balance of survival. The sharing also reflected social bonds. Families sat close, children huddled against mothers, young hunters proud to offer their catch. A first successful kill was celebrated, marking the passage from youth to adulthood. Elders who no longer hunted often received special portions, a recognition of their wisdom and guidance. At times, disputes arose, one family feeling shortchanged, another demanding more. But fairness was enforced, for greed threatened the tribe's cohesion. In a world of scarcity, fairness was survival. There was also spiritual weight in the act. Many tribes believed the spirit of the animal lingered, watching as its body was consumed. Offerings were sometimes made, bones placed carefully in the fire, fat left outside for the spirits, words whispered in thanks. These gestures acknowledged that life had been taken, so that life might continue. Sharing food, then, was not only about feeding mouths, but about maintaining balance with the unseen world, ensuring that animals would continue to give themselves in future hunts. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled and frost crept into shelters, food became more than sustenance. It was comfort. A belly filled with warm meat gave strength against despair. The act of eating together strengthened bonds, creating a shield of community against isolation. In the flickering glow of firelight, the tribe was reminded that they were not alone, that survival was shared, that each bite was a promise of another day lived. Yet, the fear of hunger was never far away. Even after a feast, the memory of empty days lingered, the knowledge that tomorrow's hunt might fail. Food was hoarded, preserved, hidden away for the bleakest weeks. Mothers gave up portions for their children. Fathers sometimes went without to feed the young. Sacrifice was woven into survival, and generosity became a silent act of heroism. The cycle of hunting and sharing created a rhythm that defined winter life. Each kill was a victory, each meal a communal triumph. The fairness of sharing prevented resentment, ensured loyalty, and preserved trust. It was in these acts, dividing, distributing, honoring, that the foundations of human society were quietly built. From those fireside meals came the roots of fairness, of justice, of family and culture. For cavemen, survival was never just about strength in the hunt. It was about what came after: the wisdom to share, the courage to sacrifice, the ability to transform scarcity into unity. Around the fire, with food divided and mouths fed, the tribe affirmed its bond. In the darkest winter, that bond was their truest weapon against extinction. The frozen wilderness was never empty. Beyond the flicker of campfires and the fragile safety of shelters, predators stalked the snow. For cavemen, these creatures were both adversaries and teachers, both threats of life and symbols of power. Winter sharpened the hunger of all beings, and when the landscape turned white and prey grew scarce, predators became bolder, fiercer, and more dangerous. To survive, humans had to understand these animals, sometimes fighting them, sometimes following them, and sometimes even learning from them. Wolves were among the most constant presences of winter. Their howls pierced the silence of frozen nights, a chilling reminder that men were not the only hunters. Wolf packs moved like shadows across the plains, coordinated, relentless, able to bring down prey far larger than themselves. For humans, wolves were direct competitors for the same food sources: reindeer, elk, and bison. A single wolf could be fought off, but a pack was another matter. Yet over time, wolves also became something more: companions and allies. Some humans began to tame wolf pups, feeding them scraps, forging the first tentative steps toward domestication. What began as rivalry slowly evolved into partnership, an alliance that would echo across thousands of years. Other predators offered no such companionship. The saber-toothed cat, with its massive fangs, was a nightmare of stealth and strength. In the deep snow, it stalked silently, its body built for ambush. A single leap could crush a man before he even raised a spear. For cavemen, such beasts embodied death itself. Unpredictable, terrifying, unstoppable when hunger drove them close. To kill one was both a desperate act of defense and a triumph worthy of legend, its fangs perhaps worn as charms, proof of survival against the deadliest of foes. Lions, too, prowled the Ice Age plains. The cave lion, larger than modern lions, hunted in prides, its golden fur blending with the pale grasslands. These lions often sought the same prey as humans, and clashes were inevitable. A lion pride could scatter hunters, or worse, follow them back to camp. Yet there was respect, too. Some cave paintings show lions not as monsters, but as majestic beings, perhaps revered even as they were feared. To confront such a predator was to confront the raw essence of nature's power. Bears embodied another duality. In summer, they were omnivorous wanderers, but in winter, their behavior shifted. Many hibernated, but those disturbed in their dens became ferocious adversaries. A hungry bear in the snow was almost impossible to defeat, its strength overwhelming, its claws tearing through flesh and bone. Yet bear fat and hides were invaluable, and the animal's sheer presence inspired awe. Some tribes may have considered the bear a spirit guardian, its survival through the harshest winters a model for human endurance. Rituals in cave art suggest that killing a bear was not taken lightly. It was an act of profound significance. Predators were not always enemies. However, they were also guides. Humans learned to track by watching wolves and lions follow herds. They learned caution from the stealth of cats, persistence in the chase of wolves, ferocity from the charge of bears. In predators, humans saw reflections of their own struggles, the same hunger, the same fight against the cold, the same drive to endure. These animals became more than rivals. They became mirrors, shaping human identity through contrast and imitation. But the danger was real and constant. Nighttime was the most perilous. When fires burned low and watchers grew weary, predators crept closer. The scent of meat from a recent hunt could attract wolves from miles away. Children had to be guarded, shelters fortified, fires fed. The fear of eyes glinting in the darkness kept tribes alert, reminding them that safety was never absolute. A single mistake, a fire left to die, a sentry who slept could bring ruin. Still, survival against predators forged resilience. Each encounter taught humans to fight smarter, to band together, to use fire and weapons as tools of dominance. Predators shaped not only human behavior, but also human myth. They became spirits in stories, gods in ritual, symbols in art. The wolf, the lion, the bear, the saber-tooth, all lived in imagination as much as in the forests and plains. They reminded humans of their place in the order of life. Fragile yet determined, weak alone but powerful together. In the frozen world, predators embodied the eternal contrast of existence. They were the fear lurking in shadows, yet also the fire that drove humans to greater ingenuity. They were enemies that threatened extinction, but also rivals that sharpened skills. To live among them was to live on the edge of danger, every day a test of courage and unity. For cavemen, predators were not just beasts of winter. They were the fierce rivals that helped define what it meant to be human. As snow blanketed the land and the cold winds howled across the frozen plains, cavemen gathered around their fires not only to cook and warm themselves, but also to seek something beyond survival. Winter was merciless, unpredictable, and long, stretching months into years when supplies ran low and hope grew thin. In these harsh months, humans turned to ritual, prayer, and the unseen world, seeking to influence forces far greater than themselves. The flicker of the fire became a sacred space where the living communed with spirits, asking for protection, successful hunts, and, above all, shorter winters. Fireside rituals were both practical and spiritual. Before setting out to hunt, hunters often offered thanks to flames or to spirits believed to inhabit the forest and sky. A piece of meat might be left of the fire, a small offering to ensure the favor of the animal's spirit and the guidance of unseen powers. Songs were chanted, clapping and stamping creating rhythm, believed to awaken benevolent spirits or drive away evil ones. Smoke itself carried prayers into the unseen realm, a bridge between the physical world of snow and beasts and the intangible world of gods and spirits. Every ritual had meaning: protection from cold, safety from predators, and the hope that the winter might pass more quickly, easing the suffering of the tribe. The role of elders and shamans was central. These individuals, often older members with keen observation and experience, led ceremonies, guided chants, and interpreted signs from nature. They were the keepers of knowledge, understanding which symbols, gestures, and offerings might appeal to spirits or influence the unseen. In some caves, elaborate depictions of animals, humans, and mysterious symbols were painted, often near fires. These images were more than art. They were prayers etched in the stone, acts of devotion and desperation seeking favor in a world dominated by ice. The rituals themselves were steeped in contrast: life versus death, warmth versus cold, hope versus despair. Around the fire, shadows leapt across the walls, shapes of hunters, children, and animals intertwined. Elders spoke of spirits that roamed the forests, bringing luck to the brave or misfortune to the careless. Offerings and chants were performed not just to please these spirits, but also to acknowledge the constant peril surrounding the tribe. In the darkest nights of winter, these rituals transformed fear into action, despair into courage, and uncertainty into a sense of control. Children participated as well, learning through observation and imitation. By watching the elders, they absorbed the lessons of survival, encoded in ritual. They learned respect for nature, understanding that every animal hunted and every fire tended was part of a larger cycle. Even playful dances around the flames carried meaning, imitating wolves, reindeer, or bears, perhaps teaching stealth, patience, or courage. In this way, spiritual practices and survival skills intertwined, preparing the next generation to endure winters and predators alike. Prayers for shorter winters were especially poignant. Long, brutal months could destroy food stores, kill the young and weak, and exhaust the strongest members of the tribe. In response, humans developed ceremonies specifically aimed at influencing seasonal cycles. Stones were arranged, fires built in particular patterns, chants repeated in the cold, each act imbued with intention. While modern science dismisses these rituals as superstition, for Ice Age humans they were a vital psychological tool, offering hope and cohesion in a world otherwise defined by hardship. Rituals also reinforce social bonds. The tribe gathered together, sharing warmth, food, and stories. Every chant, every offering, every fire tended collectively was a demonstration of unity. The act of praying together strengthened trust, ensured cooperation in hunts, and reminded members that survival was not solitary. Even in the face of extreme cold, fear, and hunger, these ceremonies cultivated resilience and belonging. A tribe that performed rituals together endured winter more effectively than one that fractured under stress. Symbolism was everywhere. The fire represented life itself, its glow warding off spirits of misfortune and the shadows of predators. Animal figures painted on walls were not mere decoration, but reverence for the creatures that gave food and taught lessons. Stones, bones, and feathers used in rituals embodied the tribe's connection to the natural and spiritual worlds. These tangible objects served as anchors for intangible hopes, grounding humans in a reality they could shape even amid uncertainty. The psychological impact of these rituals cannot be overstated. In the isolation of long winters, when nights seemed endless and snow stretched to the horizon, fireside ceremonies brought comfort. They transformed fear into focus, chaos into order, and isolation into community. They were a reminder that even when survival seemed beyond reach, humans had agency. They could tend the fire, offer thanks, observe the signs, and act with intention. Each ritual was an assertion that life, even in the harshest cold, could be guided, celebrated, and protected. Ultimately, fireside rituals were the culmination of the Ice Age struggle, the convergence of survival, ingenuity, and imagination. Around the fire, humans asserted themselves against death, cold, and darkness. Through prayer, offerings, art, and song, they connected the present with the unseen, blending practical knowledge with spiritual meaning. These rituals preserved not just life, but humanity itself, forging a sense of purpose and identity that would endure long after the last Ice Age winter had passed. In the coldest nights, when snow pressed against shelters and predators roamed the silent plains, the fire's glow became the center of the universe for the cavemen. It was warmth, protection, ceremony, and hope all in one. And through these rituals, humans learned the most vital lesson of all. Even in a world dominated by ice and uncertainty, they could influence, adapt, and endure, carrying the spark of life and spirit to the longest winters in history. Winter was not just a season to endure. It was a force that dictated movement, survival, and the very shape of human life. Cavemen could not remain in one place indefinitely, for snow-buried vegetation, froze water sources, and forced prey to migrate to more favorable lands. The Ice Age was a world in motion, and to survive, humans had to follow the herds. Every journey across frozen plains or through icy forests was a gamble, a test of endurance, strategy, and unity. Failure to move with the rhythms of nature could mean famine, death, and the collapse of entire communities. The decision to migrate was never taken lightly. Elders observed the signs, the tracks of reindeer and elk, the condition of the remaining vegetation, and the patterns of predators. Fires were tended carefully before departure, embers preserved for lighting new camps, and supplies of dried meat, furs, and tools were packed with precision. The tribe traveled in groups, often slowly, keeping weaker members in the center, protecting children and elders from the harsh winds. Migration was both necessity and strategy, balancing speed, safety, and survival across treacherous terrain. Traveling through snow and ice required ingenuity. Hunters used knowledge of the landscape to navigate safely, following frozen rivers, avoiding hidden crevasses, and seeking natural shelters along the route. Tools and clothing had to be maintained mid-journey. Sledges made from wood or bone were sometimes used to carry supplies, while dried furs insulated bodies against frostbite during long days on the trail. Every decision carried consequences. A wrong turn could leave the tribe stranded in an empty, frozen expanse, exposed to predators and the unrelenting cold. The migration itself was a complex choreography. Scouts moved ahead to locate food sources, herds, and safe resting points. Hunters guarded flanks against wolves, lions, and other predators, while others kept watch for sudden storms or hidden dangers. Children learned by observation, mimicking elders' movements and absorbing the survival knowledge that would carry them into adulthood. Even the animals accompanying humans, dogs or tamed wolves, played roles, alluring the tribe to danger, helping with hunting or pulling loads. Every member, human or animal, contributed to the success of the journey. Following the herds brought both reward and risk. Prey animals provided sustenance, hides, and materials for tools and clothing, but chasing them often led into unknown territories. Crossing frozen rivers could be deadly, thin ice giving way under weight. Snowstorms could isolate members, and rival tribes or predators could exploit a vulnerable group. Yet the payoff was essential. Failure to find migrating herds meant starvation, frostbite, or worse. Humans learned to calculate risk, to move deliberately, and to trust in both knowledge and instinct to guide them through the shifting world. Migration shaped not only survival, but culture. The paths taken became traditions, passed down through generations. Stories and maps of winter journeys were embedded in memory, and sometimes illustrated on cave walls, serving as guides for future hunts and migrations. Certain landmarks held sacred meaning. A hill, a river bend, or a grove might be associated with past survival, celebrated in ritual and remembered for its importance. Travel was thus both practical and symbolic, connecting humans to the land, to each other, and to their collective history. Community cohesion was vital on the move. Sharing food, caring for the weak, and maintaining morale became central to survival. Conflicts could be fatal. Cooperation was life-sustaining. Every shared burden, every coordinated hunt, and every protected member reinforced bonds that fire alone could not forge. Migration was as much about navigating human relationships as navigating frozen landscapes, and it was here that leadership, wisdom, and unity proved most critical. The psychological toll of long winter journeys was immense. Endless snow, howling winds, and nights without shelter tested endurance. Fear of predators, hunger, and exhaustion pressed on every member. Yet, rituals persisted even on the move. Small fires built to honor spirits. Songs chanted to strengthen courage, and offerings made to ensure a safe path. These practices reminded the tribe that they were not alone, that even in the vast, frozen wilderness, their actions could influence outcomes and provide hope. Through thousands of winters, migration became the lifeblood of survival. Following the herds taught humans to read the environment, anticipate challenges, and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. It strengthened physical endurance, sharpened strategic thinking, and deepened social cohesion. Each journey was a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the refusal to surrender in the face of the Ice Age's relentless cold. Ultimately, winter migrations were more than movement. They were a dance with life and death. Cavemen followed the rhythms of nature, learned from its dangers, and honored its lessons. Every step through snow and ice, every decision to advance or pause, every night spent in a firelit camp carried the weight of survival. These journeys forged humanity itself, teaching lessons of endurance, cooperation, and adaptability that would echo across millennia. The relentless winters of the Ice Age did more than test human endurance. They forged the very foundation of what it meant to be human. Every fire lit, every shelter built, every garment sewn, and every hunt undertaken contributed to a legacy of resilience, ingenuity, and adaptation. Cavemen were not merely surviving. They were experimenting with tools, strategies, and social structures that would echo through millennia, shaping the course of human history. The harshest season produced the sharpest minds, the strongest bonds, and the deepest cultural roots. Winter survival demanded innovation on every front. Fire, first master for warmth and protection, became a tool for cooking, defense, and social cohesion. Shelters evolved from natural caves to intricate huts, demonstrating problem-solving and engineering skills. Clothing transformed from simple draped hides into carefully stitched garments designed to trap heat and allow mobility. Each adaptation was a response to necessity, yet each also carried lessons that would inform humanity long after the Ice Age thawed. These practical innovations laid the groundwork for civilization itself, teaching humans that ingenuity could overcome even the harshest natural obstacles. Social organization and cooperation were equally vital. Families and tribes depended on collective action for survival, hunting in coordinated groups, sharing food equitably, and caring for the weakest members. Rituals, whether fireside prayers for shorter winters or offerings to animal spirits, reinforced bonds and created shared identity. Leadership emerged, often based on experience, wisdom, or courage, guiding communities through uncertainty. These early social structures became the blueprint for human society, emphasizing fairness, trust, and mutual dependence. In essence, the Ice Age was both a crucible of survival and a training ground for civilization. Psychological resilience was another crucial legacy. Cavemen faced fear daily: predators, starvation, frostbite, and the isolation of vast frozen landscapes. Yet through ritual, storytelling, and communal activities, they learned to manage stress, maintain hope, and turn anxiety into action. Fireside rituals and collective hunts were not mere cultural expressions. They were mechanisms for mental endurance. By mastering both the physical and psychological challenges of winter, humans developed traits of patience, courage, and foresight that would define the species for generations. The material culture of the Ice Age also left enduring marks. Tools, weapons, and clothing techniques evolved through experimentation and observation. Bone needles, flint-tipped spears, and woven furs were not only practical, but represented the beginnings of technology and craftsmanship. Art and cave paintings documented experiences, spiritual beliefs, and observations of the natural world, preserving knowledge of the future. These cultural artifacts are proof that even in the harshest conditions, humans were thinking, creating, and leaving legacies that would inform successors long after the Ice Age ended. Moreover, the relationship with nature shaped early environmental understanding. Following herds, observing predator behavior, and interpreting seasonal changes taught humans to read the land, anticipate challenges, and interact with ecosystems sustainably. Knowledge of animal migrations, plant cycles, and weather patterns became crucial survival skills and established an early framework for ecological intelligence. Humans learned to live in balance with their environment, understanding that survival depended not just on brute strength, but on observation, respect, and adaptation. Winter survival also instilled a profound sense of mortality and legacy. The fragility of life in harsh seasons made every success, every survival, and every story meaningful. Children were educated in skills, rituals, and traditions to ensure continuity. Elders imparted wisdom, ensuring that knowledge of fire, clothing, hunting, and shelter pass across generations. In this way, cavemen created not only life-sustaining strategies, but a cultural memory, a continuity that allowed humanity to endure long after individual lives ended. Ultimately, the Ice Age's winters were more than a test. They were a crucible that refined humanity. Cavemen emerged not merely as survivors, but as innovators, artists, strategists, and social architects. Every fire tended, every praise shared, and every ritual performed contributed to a growing legacy of human intelligence, cooperation, and culture. The lessons of cold, danger, and scarcity became the foundation for resilience, shaping the trajectory of human civilization in ways still felt today. The legacy of winter survival teaches a timeless lesson. Adversity, when met with ingenuity, courage, and community, can forge strength that endures far beyond immediate struggle. Cavemen, through their fires, shelters, clothing, hunts, and rituals, not only survived the Ice Age, they created the blueprint for humanity itself. In facing the coldest nights, they discovered warmth, not just in fire or furs, but in knowledge, culture, and the enduring spirit of life.